Bright Futures Gala was no longer a celebration. It had become a stage for humiliation. Scarlett stood at the center of the storm, her hand pressed gently against her swollen belly, the white silk of her gown glowing under the chandeliers. Around her, the murmurs grew into a symphony of scandal. Some whispered in pity, others in awe, but every pair of eyes was fixed on her. Jonathan thrived on spectacle, but Scarlett's silence was unnerving him. He had expected tears, anger, maybe even a dramatic exit. Instead, she stood tall, her posture regal, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. Cassandra shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that the room was no longer admiring her. For the first time all night, she felt like a shadow. "Scarlett," Jonathan sneered, raising his voice to drown the whispers, "you were never built for this world. You think being my wife makes you special? You've been a burden, holding me back while I fought for our future. Cassandra understands ambition. She knows how to stand beside a man like me." The cruelty was deliberate, each word sharpened to wound. Scarlett's breath caught, the pain twisting inside her chest. The child within her stirred as if sensing the storm, but she refused to crumble. Instead, she met his gaze head-on, her voice steady though soft. "A man like you doesn't deserve to be stood beside." Gasps erupted. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity electric. Scarlett's words had pierced through Jonathan's armor, and for the first time, his smug smile faltered. Cassandra clutched his arm tighter, her nails digging into his tuxedo, desperate to steady his unraveling composure. Jonathan's face darkened. "Careful," he hissed, his voice low but caught by microphones nearby. "You don't want to make a scene." Scarlett let out a small, bitter laugh. "You already did that for me." The orchestra, sensing the tension, had long since fallen silent. All that remained was the charged air between husband and wife, mistress and mother, betrayal and dignity. Scarlett turned to the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the sea of glittering faces. "I stood by him through everything," she said, her voice cracking but unbroken. "I gave up my work, my dreams, my life, and tonight he tells me I was a burden." Her words carried the weight of countless women who had been silenced, forgotten, dismissed. In that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every wife who had sacrificed too much for a man who gave too little. The audience shifted, discomfort rippling through them. Even those who had come to sip champagne and gossip felt a pang of shame. Jonathan tried to laugh it off. "Don't play the victim, Scarlett. No one here buys it." But they did. The looks of sympathy directed at Scarlett, the cold stares cast at Jonathan, told a different story. Cassandra's smile twitched, her confidence slipping. She hadn't signed up to be booed in whispers, or to be photographed looking petty beside a woman glowing with resilience. Scarlett steadied herself, tears brimming but refusing to fall. "You may have money, Jonathan. You may think you have power, but what you'll never have again," she paused, her hand firm on her belly, "is me, or our child's respect." The words landed like a thunderclap. Jonathan's face drained of color. For once, he was speechless. Cassandra looked as though she wanted to disappear into the floor, and the audience, oh the audience, erupted into murmurs that would become tomorrow's headlines. Across the room, Gabriel Knight watched with sharp, unwavering eyes. He had seen powerful men crumble before, but never under the weight of a woman's truth. Tonight, Scarlett had drawn a line in the sand, and Gabriel knew the moment had come for him to step out of the shadows. As Jonathan reached for Scarlett's arm to drag her away, another hand intervened, strong, steady, and ready to defend her at all costs. Jonathan's hand shot forward, his fingers closing around Scarlett's arm. The force wasn't enough to hurt her physically, but it was enough to send a clear message. Control. He wanted to drag her away, to silence her, before her presence dismantled the carefully constructed image he had built. But before he could pull her from the spotlight, another hand intervened. It was firm, steady, and undeniably commanding. "Let her go." The voice came from Gabriel Knight, his tone low but edged with steel. The crowd shifted as though sensing the arrival of a new force. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his ego bristling at the interruption. He turned to face Gabriel, the tall man with dark hair and a quiet presence that carried more weight than all the chandeliers in the room combined. "And who the hell are you?" Jonathan spat. Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't need to raise his voice. His calmness was its own kind of power. A man who doesn't stand by while a pregnant woman is manhandled. The room erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed furiously, hungry for the confrontation. Jonathan's grip loosened under the pressure of so many watching eyes. Scarlett stumbled back, her strength wavering after the heated exchange. She pressed a hand against her belly, trying to steady her breathing. Gabriel was at her side instantly, his hand lightly brushing her back to support her without taking away her dignity. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with genuine concern. Scarlett nodded, though her eyes shimmered with exhaustion. The emotional toll of Jonathan's betrayal, the weight of the pregnancy, and the suffocating atmosphere of hundreds of eyes. It was too much. Her body trembled, her knees weakening beneath her gown. The crowd gasped as Scarlett swayed. Gabriel caught her before she could fall, lifting her with surprising gentleness. The sight struck everyone. A woman betrayed, carried not by the man who should have loved her, but by a stranger who treated her like something sacred. Jonathan's face twisted with rage. "Put her down, she's my wife." Gabriel turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jonathan's. "You forfeited that right the moment you humiliated her." His words were calm, but they cut sharper than any blade. Scarlett buried her face against Gabriel's chest, trying to hide the tears finally escaping her eyes. For months, she had carried her pain in silence. Tonight, it had spilled over. The orchestra sat frozen. Guests whispered furiously. Even Cassandra, once smug and confident, looked suddenly small, clutching her glass with trembling fingers. "Take her home," someone whispered in the crowd. "She doesn't belong here." But Gabriel shook his head, addressing no one in particular yet, commanding everyone's attention. "She belongs wherever she chooses to stand, and tonight she will not be erased." The words hung in the air, electric, undeniable. Scarlett's tears slowed, her breath steadying as she listened. For the first time in months, she felt protected, not like a burden, but like a woman worth defending. Jonathan lunged forward, but a group of onlookers stepped in subtly, blocking his path. His power was slipping. Every second Scarlett leaned on Gabriel's strength was a second. Jonathan lost his grip on the narrative. Scarlett pulled back slightly, meeting Gabriel's gaze. There was something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Understanding, empathy, and a pain that mirrored her own. It was as if he knew what it meant to lose, to hurt, to carry scars invisible to the world. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his eyes softening as he replied. "Because I know what it feels like to love and lose, and I won't stand by while you're destroyed." The confession struck something deep inside her. Before she could respond, Jonathan's furious voice rose above the murmurs. "This isn't over, Scarlett. You'll regret crossing me." Gabriel shifted, his arms still steady around her, and said words that would silence the entire ballroom. "No, Jonathan, the only one who will regret tonight is you." The ballroom still buzzed with whispers, but Scarlett's world narrowed to the man holding her steady. Gabriel Knight wasn't like the others in the room. He didn't wear arrogance like armor. His presence was quiet yet commanding, his strength tempered by a gentleness that unsettled Jonathan more than open defiance ever could. Scarlett, still trembling, studied him. His jaw was strong, but there were lines etched into his face that no amount of wealth could erase. They weren't from stress meetings or corporate takeovers. They were the lines of a man who had carried grief. For years, Gabriel Knight had been a mystery to New York's elite. A billionaire who shunned the limelight, he rarely appeared in magazines or gossip columns. He never flaunted yachts or mistresses. Instead, he built quietly, investing in industries that created jobs in forgotten towns, supporting charities without attaching his name. Rumors swirled. Some said he was eccentric, others said he was hiding something. The truth was simpler and sadder. Gabriel had known poverty. He grew up in a Rust Belt town where the factories had long since gone silent. His father worked double shifts at a warehouse until his back broke down, and his mother cleaned houses to keep food on the table. Gabriel learned early what it meant to go without luxuries, without comfort, sometimes even without dinner. But what they never lacked was love. His parents gave him that in abundance, and it shaped him more than money ever could. Through scholarships and relentless determination, Gabriel clawed his way through school. He worked nights in diners, shoveled snow in the mornings, and studied until dawn. By the time he graduated from business school, he was exhausted but unstoppable. Every dollar he made, he invested carefully, building slowly, methodically, until his fortune eclipsed even those born into dynasties. But wealth wasn't the crown of his life. That belonged to Elena, his wife. They met in their 20s when Gabriel was still rough around the edges, and Elena was the anchor who steadied him. She saw not his hunger for success, but his heart. For years they built a life together, modest at first, then grander as his wealth grew, but always grounded in love. Until the diagnosis. Cancer. Relentless, merciless, and indifferent to money. Gabriel poured everything into saving her. Specialists, treatments abroad, experimental therapies. But no empire, no fortune, no ambition could stop the inevitable. Elena died in his arms, leaving a void no amount of success could fill. From that day, Gabriel withdrew from the spotlight. He refused to let tabloids exploit his grief. Instead, he buried himself in work, but not for vanity. He built schools, hospitals, shelters. He carried Elena's memory in every act of kindness, every life improved by the wealth he no longer needed for himself. And yet, despite the years, the grief remained etched in his soul. He had loved once and lost once. That pain never left him, which was why, when he saw Scarlett, radiant but breaking, betrayed yet standing tall, something in him stirred. He recognized the loneliness in her eyes, the fight to survive while carrying the weight of a world determined to crush her. Scarlett didn't know all of this as Gabriel steadied her in the ballroom. She only felt the safety of his hand, the sincerity in his gaze. But others knew. Whispers spread quickly. That's Gabriel Knight, the reclusive billionaire. Didn't he lose his wife? The crowd's perception shifted. This wasn't a stranger intervening. This was a man with scars of his own. A man respected even in silence. Jonathan bristled, hating how quickly the tide turned. Cassandra leaned in, her whisper sharp and venomous. Why is he protecting her? Jonathan's eyes narrowed, rage boiling beneath the surface. Because he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. And as the orchestra struck a nervous note to mask the tension, Gabriel finally released Scarlett's arm. Only to step forward, preparing to face Jonathan head-on. The confrontation had shaken the ballroom, but the weight of it pressed hardest on Scarlett. Her steps grew unsteady as the orchestra's uneasy notes faded behind her. Gabriel noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he guided her gently out of the main hall, down a quieter corridor lined with gilded mirrors and velvet drapes. Away from the flash of cameras and the sting of whispers, Scarlett could finally breathe, or so she thought. The moment the heavy doors closed behind them, her composure cracked. Scarlett leaned against the wall, her body trembling. The white silk of her gown clung to her frame, her hand instinctively protecting the curve of her belly. For hours she had carried herself with dignity, but alone, the truth spilled through the cracks. "He humiliated me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "In front of everyone, in front of our child." Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. "And I let it happen for too long." Gabriel stood a step away, giving her space, but the ache in his chest deepened with every tear she shed. He had seen powerful men reduce women to shadows before, but seeing Scarlett, so strong minutes ago, now collapsing under the weight of betrayal, struck something inside him he thought had long died with Elena. "You didn't let this happen," Gabriel said softly. His voice wasn't pitying, it was firm, grounding. "He made his choices, cruel choices. That doesn't make you weak." Scarlett shook her head, her sobs catching in her throat. "I gave him everything. My career, my time, my love. I believed in him. And he?" She stopped, choking on the words. "He made me feel like I was nothing, like I was disposable." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his own memories rushing back. He remembered the helpless nights sitting at Elena's bedside, hating that all his power and wealth meant nothing. He had felt useless, powerless. And now, watching Scarlett unravel, he recognized the same wound, the belief that love given selflessly had been wasted. He moved closer, his hand hovering before finally resting on her shoulder. "You are not disposable, Scarlett. You are carrying life inside you. You walked into that ballroom tonight and silenced a room full of people who expected you to stay hidden. That is not weakness. That is strength." Scarlett lifted her eyes to him, glistening with tears. "Strength doesn't stop the pain." "No," Gabriel admitted. "But it gives you the power to turn pain into something greater. Something no one can take from you." For a moment the world stilled. Scarlett studied him, not just his words but the raw honesty in his eyes. He wasn't a man seeking advantage or attention. He wasn't Jonathan, building empires to feed his ego. Gabriel spoke like someone who had known love, loss, and survival. Someone who understood. Her sobs softened into shaky breaths. She wiped her cheeks, embarrassed by her collapse. "I don't even know why you're helping me," she whispered. "You don't owe me anything." Gabriel hesitated, his eyes darkening with the memory of Elena. "Maybe I'm helping because I couldn't save the woman I loved. But tonight, I won't stand by and watch another woman be destroyed." Scarlett's lips parted, the weight of his confession settling between them. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude, confusion, and something unspoken tangled inside her chest. Before either could speak again, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Scarlett stiffened, her hand tightening on her gown. The muffled voices were unmistakable, Jonathan's, sharp with fury, and Cassandra's, dripping with venom. And as the doors rattled under their push, Scarlett realized the private sanctuary she had found was about to be shattered once again. The corridor door swung open with a force that rattled the hinges. Jonathan stormed in, his face flushed with fury, Cassandra trailing behind him with a smirk that could slice glass. The quiet sanctuary Scarlett had found vanished in an instant, replaced by the storm she had just escaped. "There you are," Jonathan spat, his eyes blazing as they landed on Scarlett, then flicked to Gabriel. "Hiding in a corner with another man while you humiliate me in front of my peers? How dare you?" Scarlett froze, but Gabriel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and Jonathan. His stance was calm but unyielding, his presence filling the narrow corridor. "You humiliated yourself," Gabriel said evenly, "and you won't lay another finger on her." Jonathan laughed bitterly, though the sound carried no joy. "Do you even know who I am? This is my wife, my reputation, my life, and you." He jabbed a finger toward Gabriel. "You're nothing but a stray desperate for a spotlight." Cassandra slinked closer, her voice laced with venom. "Oh, Jonathan, don't waste your breath. Men like him swoop in when women are weak. He's using your wife's tears to make himself look like a savior." She turned to Scarlett, her tone mocking. "Pathetic, really. You thought you could play goddess tonight, but look at you. Broken, leaning on another man while carrying a child from someone who doesn't even want you." Scarlett's chest tightened, her hand instinctively clutching her belly. The words stung because they pressed against her deepest fears. But Gabriel spoke before the poison could sink further. "Careful," he warned, his voice low and cutting. "Mocking a mother while she carries life says more about you than her." The confidence in Gabriel's tone silenced Cassandra momentarily. Jonathan, however, stepped forward, his anger boiling over. "Stay out of this, Knight. This is between me and my wife." "She's not your possession," Gabriel shot back. His calm demeanor barely masked the steel in his voice. "She's a woman, a mother, and you've treated her like dirt in front of hundreds of people. That ends now." The words hung heavy in the air. Scarlett blinked, stunned by the conviction in Gabriel's defense. For months she had been silenced, gaslighted, made to feel invisible. Yet here was a man, a stranger until tonight, who refused to let her be erased. Jonathan scoffed, masking his unease with arrogance. "You think you can swoop in and play the hero? Scarlett belongs to me, and when this baby is born, the world will know it carries my name, not yours." Scarlett flinched at the cruelty, but Gabriel remained steady. "A child doesn't need your name, Jonathan," he said firmly. "It needs love, something you clearly have no idea how to give." For the first time, Jonathan's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The fury that had always been Scarlett's private nightmare now threatened to spill into public violence. Cassandra tugged at his arm, suddenly less confident as she realized the cameras might follow even here. Scarlett found her voice, trembling but resolute. "You've taken enough from me, Jonathan. Tonight, you don't get to take my dignity too." Her words sent a shockwave through the corridor. Jonathan's eyes blazed, and for a moment, Scarlett thought he might strike. Gabriel shifted instantly, his body shielding her, his eyes locked on Jonathan's with a promise of consequences. The silence stretched, thick with danger. Then Jonathan hissed, "You'll regret this, Scarlett. Both of you will." And as he stormed closer, hand raised in fury, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. Security was on their way, and everything was about to explode. The tension in the corridor was suffocating. Jonathan's hand hovered mid-air, his rage boiling over, ready to crash down on Scarlett the way it had so many times in private. But before the blow could land, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Colton, step back." Two members of the gala's private security team appeared at the end of the corridor, their black suits crisp, their expressions unflinching. The echo of their footsteps filled the silence, each step a reminder that Jonathan was no longer the untouchable king of the room. Jonathan froze, his arrogance colliding with the sudden reality that he was being watched, judged, not just by Scarlett and Gabriel, but by outsiders with authority. His hand lowered reluctantly, but his eyes still burned with fury. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly, slipping back into the charm that had fooled so many for so long. "My wife is emotional. We're simply having a private conversation." Scarlett's breath caught at the word emotional. How many times had he used it as a weapon, to dismiss her pain, to silence her voice, to make her feel small? The fury welled up, but before she could speak, Gabriel's voice sliced through the air. "Private conversations don't involve raised hands." His tone was calm, but the steel in it made even the security guards glance at him with respect. Jonathan's jaw twitched, his polished mask slipping again. "You don't get to lecture me. You don't know me." Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "I know men like you, and I know what happens when no one stops them." The corridor buzzed with whispers as more guests edged closer, drawn by the commotion. Phone cameras appeared, recording every second. Jonathan's nightmare was becoming reality, his carefully curated image unraveling in real time. Cassandra hissed under her breath, "Jonathan, everyone's watching. Stop this." But Jonathan couldn't stop. His pride wouldn't allow it. He turned on Scarlett, his words cutting like glass. "Do you see what you've done? You've made me a laughingstock. You've dragged me down in front of everyone." Scarlett straightened, her tears replaced by a spark of defiance. "No, Jonathan, you did that yourself." The crowd gasped, the words echoing louder than any slap could. For the first time, Scarlett didn't shrink under his anger. She stood against it. And Gabriel, steady at her side, made sure she didn't stand alone. Security moved closer, their hands ready but cautious. "Sir," one guard said firmly, "you need to calm down. If this continues, we'll have to escort you out." The threat was unthinkable for Jonathan Colton, a billionaire, a titan of industry, to be treated like a misbehaving guest. His face twisted, caught between fury and humiliation. He glanced at the growing crowd, realizing the cameras were capturing every flicker of his rage. If he exploded now, his empire would pay the price. Cassandra tugged his arm desperately, her whisper sharp. "Jonathan, stop. You're making it worse." For a long, tense moment, Jonathan stood frozen, his chest heaving. Then, with a forced laugh, he raised his hands as though surrendering. "Fine," he said, his voice strained. "If the lady wants to play the victim, let her. But this isn't over." He turned sharply, brushing past the guards, dragging Cassandra with him. The crowd parted, their eyes cold, their whispers merciless. For the first time, Jonathan walked away not as a conqueror but as a man shrinking under the weight of disgrace. Scarlett exhaled shakily, her body trembling with the aftermath. Gabriel's hand remained steady at her back, grounding her. "You did more than stand your ground," he murmured. "You won tonight." Scarlett shook her head, tears threatening again. "No," she whispered. "This is only the beginning," because as Jonathan disappeared into the crowd, he wasn't retreating, he was plotting. And Scarlett had no idea just how far he was willing to go to destroy her. The gala continued in fractured fragments of music and murmurs, but for Scarlett, the night had ended the moment Jonathan stormed away. The glittering chandeliers, the swirling gowns, the scent of champagne, they blurred into a haze of exhaustion and humiliation. Her body trembled from the weight of everything she had endured. Gabriel guided her out of the ballroom, through a side corridor that led to the quieter lounge reserved for VIPs. The noise of the crowd faded with every step until all that remained was the sound of her own uneven breathing. The lounge was dimly lit, its velvet couches and golden accents meant for whispered deals and secret rendezvous. Tonight, it became a sanctuary. Scarlett sank onto a couch, her hands cradling her belly protectively. For the first time since she had walked into the gala, she allowed herself to exhale. Her body ached, her heart throbbed with betrayal, and her spirit, though not broken, felt dangerously close to shattering. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought if I showed my face, if I proved I wasn't afraid, it would matter. But all it did was make me a spectacle." Gabriel remained standing for a moment, watching her with quiet intensity. Then he lowered himself into the seat across from her, his voice calm and steady. "No, Scarlett, you didn't make yourself a spectacle. He did. You walked into that room with dignity, and you left it with more strength than most people will ever know." Scarlett let out a shaky laugh, bitter and weary. "Strength doesn't stop the whispers. Tomorrow, every headline will paint me as the pitiful wife who was replaced." She swallowed hard, her tears threatening. "And my child will grow up to read those words." Gabriel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked on hers. "Headlines fade. What matters is the truth, and your child will grow up knowing their mother stood tall when the world tried to push her down." The conviction in his tone startled her. For months, Scarlett had been drowning in Jonathan's voice, sharp, dismissive, cruel. Now, sitting across from Gabriel, she felt something different. Belief. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine belief in her worth. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar warmth of being defended. She studied him, the quiet strength in his eyes, the scars of a man who had lived through battles of his own. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his answer simple but heavy. "Because no one should fight a war like this alone." Scarlett's lips parted, her breath trembling. The words lodged in her chest, stirring something she wasn't ready to name. She lowered her gaze, her hand smoothing over the curve of her belly. For tonight, it was enough to know she wasn't alone. But reality pressed in quickly. She thought of Jonathan's parting words. This isn't over. He was not the kind of man who accepted humiliation quietly. Scarlett knew the battle had only just begun. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He has money, power, connections. I have nothing." Gabriel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was firm, grounding, unshakable. "You have more than you think," he said, "and if you'll let me, I'll make sure Jonathan Colton never hurts you again." Scarlett looked up, stunned. The intensity in Gabriel's voice left no room for doubt. This wasn't a polite offer. It was a vow. And as the lounge doors creaked open again, revealing a shadowed figure slipping inside, Scarlett realized that her fight for dignity was about to take a dangerous new turn. Jonathan Colton didn't leave the gala to lick his wounds. He left to plot. Humiliation was something his ego could never tolerate, and tonight Scarlett had delivered it in front of the very people he sought to impress. The whispers, the cameras, the icy stares, every second replayed in his mind like poison. He stormed into his limousine, Cassandra sliding in after him, her expression tight with worry. "Jonathan," she began cautiously, "maybe we should." "Don't," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to silence her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the minibar, his hand trembling not from fear but from fury. "She thinks she can stand against me? She has no idea who she's dealing with." Cassandra shifted, her confidence wavering. For the first time, she questioned whether aligning herself with Jonathan was worth the cost. But greed was a stubborn thing, and she pushed her doubt aside. "Then show her," she whispered. "Show everyone." Jonathan smirked, dark and cruel. "Oh, I will." The car sped through the city streets, neon lights streaking across the tinted windows. Jonathan pulled out his phone and made a call. Within seconds, a voice answered, deep, efficient, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who thrived in shadows. "It's time," Jonathan said flatly. "I want everything on Scarlett, bank accounts, medical records, her design business, whatever scraps she left behind. I want her destroyed, publicly and permanently." There was a pause. "Understood. And the man with her tonight?" Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Gabriel Knight. Dig deep. He thinks his money makes him untouchable, but I know men like him. There's always a weakness. Find it." As the call ended, Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his rage cooling into something far more dangerous: calculation. Scarlett had embarrassed him. Now he would strip her bare in front of the world, leaving her with nothing. Cassandra watched him, unease creeping into her chest. She had wanted Jonathan's world, the power, the spotlight, but she hadn't expected this level of cruelty. Yet when his eyes flicked to her, sharp and suspicious, she plastered on a supportive smile. "You'll win, Jonathan. You always do." He downed the whiskey, his grin returning. "Winning isn't enough. I'll make sure she begs to crawl back. And when she does, I'll crush her." Meanwhile, in the quiet lounge at the gala, Scarlett had no idea of the storm gathering against her. Gabriel sat across from her, steady and composed, but inside he was already calculating too. He had seen Jonathan's kind before, men who believed wealth excused cruelty, and he knew Jonathan would not stop here. Scarlett pressed a hand to her belly, her voice low. "I don't want to fight him, Gabriel. I just want peace for my child." Gabriel's eyes softened, but his reply was firm. "Sometimes peace comes only after you stand your ground." The door to the lounge creaked open, and the shadowed figure from before stepped fully inside. It was Margaret, Jonathan's longtime secretary, her silver hair pulled tight, her eyes darting nervously. Scarlett stiffened. "Margaret?" The older woman hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Colton, I shouldn't be here, but you need to know, Jonathan isn't finished. He's already moving pieces against you." Scarlett's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Margaret wrung her hands. "He asked me weeks ago to start gathering documents, bank statements, contracts, anything he could use to strip you of financial independence. Tonight's embarrassment, it will only make him escalate." Scarlett's breath caught, her world spinning again. Gabriel rose slowly, his gaze narrowing. "Why are you telling us this now?" Margaret swallowed hard. "Because I've worked for him long enough to know the destruction he leaves behind, and because—" She paused, her eyes wet. "Because you don't deserve what's coming." Before Scarlett could respond, Margaret slipped a folded envelope onto the table, the first piece of evidence against Jonathan, and whispered, "Hide this before it's too late." The envelope sat on the table like a ticking bomb. Scarlett stared at it, her fingers trembling as though even touching it would set off an explosion she wasn't ready for. The room felt colder, quieter, the velvet drapes swallowing every sound. Gabriel's eyes never left the envelope, his jaw tightening with the intuition of a man who knew the weight of secrets. "Open it," he said gently. Scarlett hesitated, fear and curiosity warring inside her. For years, Jonathan had held all the power, financial, social, emotional. She'd never been allowed to ask questions, and now here was a chance to glimpse the truth he had buried. Slowly, she slipped a finger beneath the flap and pulled out the contents. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank transfers, contracts, emails. At first glance, they looked like the usual noise of a billionaire's empire, but as Scarlett flipped through, her eyes widened. "These are offshore accounts," she whispered. Gabriel leaned closer, scanning the papers. "Not just accounts. These are shell companies, and not small ones." His finger traced a line of numbers, staggering in size. He's been funneling money, tens of millions, out of his companies into hidden entities. This isn't tax evasion. This is fraud on a scale that could topple him. Scarlett's hands shook as she gripped the papers tighter. "He's been hiding this while telling me we couldn't afford basic things. He told me we couldn't buy a house for my parents, couldn't support my designs, couldn't even get a decent car." Her voice cracked, pain lacing every word. And all this time, he was hoarding millions. Tears burned her eyes, but this time they weren't from weakness. They were from rage. For the first time, Scarlett felt the fire of vindication, proof that she wasn't crazy, proof that Jonathan's lies had been deliberate, calculated. Gabriel studied her, recognizing the shift in her posture. This was no longer a woman broken by betrayal. This was a woman awakening to the truth. "These documents are powerful," he said. "If they're real, Jonathan isn't just cruel, he's criminal." Scarlett looked up, fear flickering. "If I use them, if I expose him, what happens?" Gabriel's expression hardened. "You gain leverage, for your safety, for your child's future, but it won't be easy. Men like Jonathan don't go down without a fight." The weight of his words pressed on Scarlett, but instead of collapsing, she straightened. For so long, she had been forced into silence. Now in her hands, she held Jonathan's undoing. She turned to Margaret, who lingered near the door, her face pale. "Why did you risk this?" The older woman's voice trembled. "Because I watched what he did to you, and because I've seen what happens to people who cross him. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help. You deserve a chance." Scarlett's throat tightened. For the first time in months, someone from Jonathan's world had chosen her over him. It was a fragile lifeline, but it was enough to steady her. Gabriel placed a reassuring hand on Scarlett's arm. "You're stronger than you know, and now you have proof. This is the beginning of his end." Scarlett exhaled slowly, her fear transforming into resolve. She folded the documents carefully, tucking them into her clutch as though she were placing a sword back in its sheath. "Then we use this," she said quietly. "We use it to protect my child, to take back everything he stole." But before Gabriel could respond, the lounge door banged open again. A young man in a staff uniform stumbled inside, his face pale with panic. "Mrs. Colton," he gasped, "you have to leave. Now. Jonathan knows someone betrayed him. He's already looking for you." Scarlett clutched the documents to her chest, realizing the evidence that could save her might also be the very thing that destroyed her if Jonathan caught her with it. Scarlett's fingers clutched the documents so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet her feet felt rooted to the carpet. Gabriel noticed her paralysis instantly. He rose to his full height, steady and commanding, his presence like a shield against the chaos closing in. "Scarlett," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the panic, "we have to move. Now." The young staffer who had delivered the warning glanced nervously over his shoulder. "He's already sending men through the corridors. They'll check every lounge, every exit. If they find you with that envelope—" His voice broke. He didn't need to finish. Scarlett's pulse thundered. For years she had been trapped in Jonathan's world of control and fear, but never had the danger felt so immediate. She pressed a hand protectively against her belly. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her child's safety depended on what she did next. Gabriel placed a steadying hand at her back. "Trust me." She nodded shakily, and together they slipped out of the lounge. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with gilt-framed portraits and ornate sconces that cast long shadows. Every sound, the echo of heels, the rustle of fabric, felt amplified. Scarlett's heart pounded with the rhythm of footsteps behind them, each one closer than the last. "Here," the staffer whispered, leading them toward a service staircase hidden behind a velvet curtain. "Few people know about this exit. It leads to the loading docks." They descended quickly, Scarlett clutching the railing, Gabriel's hand hovering close in case she faltered. The dim stairwell smelled faintly of dust and steel, a sharp contrast to the opulence above. For a moment, Scarlett allowed herself to believe they might make it. But halfway down, voices echoed from below. Jonathan's men. Scarlett froze, panic rising. "They're here." Gabriel caught her arm, his grip firm but reassuring. "Look at me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone. We'll get through this." Something in his tone calmed her enough to keep moving. At the landing, Gabriel spotted another door, unmarked and slightly ajar. He pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with crates and catering supplies. It wasn't elegant, but it was a way out. They hurried through, the staffer leading the way. Scarlett clutched the envelope to her chest, every step a reminder that what she carried wasn't just paper, it was power. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from Jonathan. She was running with something he feared. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered. A tall shadow loomed at the far end, one of Jonathan's men, blocking their path. His expression was cold, his hand reaching toward the earpiece in his ear. "Found them," he muttered. Scarlett's breath caught. Gabriel stepped in front of her instantly, his broad frame shielding her from view. "Keep moving," he ordered the staffer without looking back. "But," Scarlett began. "No," Gabriel said firmly. "You and the baby come first." The guard advanced, his footsteps deliberate. Gabriel's stance shifted, calm but ready. Scarlett could see it now, the quiet strength of a man who had fought battles before, not in boardrooms but in life itself. The staffer pulled Scarlett toward another side door, his voice urgent. "This way. Hurry!" Scarlett hesitated, torn between fear for Gabriel and fear for her child. Her chest heaved, her tears threatening. "Gabriel." He turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "Go. Trust me." Scarlett's heart wrenched, but instinct pushed her forward. She let the staffer guide her through the door, clutching the evidence like a lifeline. Behind her she heard Gabriel's voice, calm and unshaken, as he faced Jonathan's man. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." And as the heavy door slammed shut between them, Scarlett realized she might have just left Gabriel to fight her battle alone. The heavy door shut with a metallic thud, leaving Gabriel alone in the narrow hallway with Jonathan's enforcer. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his suit stretched tight over muscles that hadn't been earned in a boardroom. His eyes were flat, merciless, the eyes of someone who didn't question orders. Gabriel stood his ground, his heart pounded, but not with fear. It was focus, the kind that came from years of hardship. He had faced worse storms than this. Poverty, loss, the death of the woman he had loved more than life itself. Compared to that, one of Jonathan's hired fists was nothing. "You don't want to do this," Gabriel said evenly, his voice calm but resonant in the echoing corridor. The man sneered. "Mr. Colton wants the wife, and what Mr. Colton wants, he gets." Gabriel's lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. "Not tonight." The guard lunged, his fist swinging wide. Gabriel sidestepped with surprising agility, his movements precise, economical. The punch smashed into the wall, plaster cracking on impact. Before the man could recover, Gabriel drove his shoulder forward, slamming the guard into a stack of crates. They toppled loudly, the sound reverberating down the hall like thunder. The man staggered, but he wasn't finished. He roared, grabbing a broken piece of wood from the wreckage, brandishing it like a weapon. Gabriel squared his stance, his expression unreadable. He wasn't fighting for pride or ego. He was fighting for Scarlett, for the unborn child she carried, for the chance to protect what Jonathan had tried to destroy. The guard swung again. Gabriel caught the blow, twisting sharply until the weapon clattered to the floor. A swift strike to the ribs followed, then a shove that sent the man crashing into the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, his breath wheezing in ragged bursts. "You're wasting your life protecting a coward," Gabriel said coldly. "Find a better man to serve." The guard glared but didn't rise. He had underestimated his opponent. Gabriel, despite his wealth, still carried the grit of the boy who had fought his way out of poverty. The scars of his past had forged him into steel. Gabriel didn't linger. He turned quickly, moving down the hallway toward the side exit where Scarlett had been led. His mind raced. Was she safe? Did Jonathan already have men waiting outside? He couldn't afford to let her slip from his protection now. As he reached the door, muffled voices drifted in. Scarlett's, trembling but firm. The staffer's, urgent. And then, another voice, one Gabriel recognized instantly. Jonathan's. Gabriel froze, his blood running cold. Jonathan had moved faster than expected. He wasn't sulking in his limousine anymore. He was hunting. Pushing the door open a fraction, Gabriel peered into the dimly lit loading dock. Scarlett stood with the staffer, the envelope clutched against her chest. Jonathan loomed just a few yards away, his expression twisted in rage. Cassandra hovering at his side like a viper ready to strike. Two more guards flanked him, their posture menacing. Scarlett's voice shook as she tried to stand her ground. "Stay away from me, Jonathan." Jonathan's laugh echoed against the steel walls. "You think you've won? You think a piece of paper changes anything? You're nothing without me, Scarlett. Nothing." Scarlett pressed her hand protectively to her belly, her tears brimming but her chin raised. "I am not nothing. Not anymore." Jonathan took a step closer. "Give me the envelope, or I'll take it myself." Gabriel pushed the door open fully, stepping into the light, his voice ringing out like a blade. "You'll have to go through me first." The air in the loading dock was thick with tension, colder than the ballroom, yet burning with hostility. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across steel crates and polished concrete. Scarlett clutched the envelope against her chest, her pulse hammering as Jonathan advanced with predatory calm. Then Gabriel stepped out of the shadows. His figure was tall, steady, unshaken, every movement deliberate. The moment Jonathan saw him, his smirk faltered. "You again," Jonathan spat. "Haven't you caused enough trouble tonight?" Gabriel's eyes locked on his, unflinching. "The trouble is yours, Jonathan. You humiliated your wife, and now you want to silence her. But tonight, she's not alone." The crowd of staff members who had trickled into the dock whispered nervously, their phones subtly raised. This was no longer a private confrontation. It was becoming a spectacle that Jonathan couldn't control. Cassandra stepped forward, her voice sharp and venomous. "Scarlett, stop this nonsense. Hand over those papers before you ruin everything. Do you want your child to grow up in poverty? Without Jonathan, you'll have nothing. Scarlett's hand tightened protectively over her belly. Her voice trembled but held steady. I'd rather have nothing than raise my child in a world built on lies. Jonathan's face twisted. He turned his fury back on Gabriel. You think you can swoop in like some savior? Do you know who I am? I built an empire from the ground up. Gabriel's voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried across the dock like a thunderclap. So did I. But I didn't build mine by breaking the people who loved me. The words struck deep. Jonathan lunged forward, but Gabriel stepped into his path, their chests nearly colliding. For a tense moment, it was billionaire against billionaire, but the difference was written in their eyes. Jonathan's burned with arrogance, Gabriel's with conviction. One of Jonathan's guards moved to intervene, but Gabriel lifted a hand, his gaze sharp as steel. If you touch her, he warned, nodding toward Scarlett, you'll regret it. Every one of you. The guard hesitated, unsettled. Gabriel's reputation preceded him, quiet, elusive, but powerful. Unlike Jonathan, his wealth wasn't tied to scandal or manipulation. He was respected, even by those who didn't know him personally. Jonathan tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. What's your angle, Knight? You want her? You want to play father to my child? Gabriel didn't blink. I want her safe, I want her free, and yes, I want her child to know what it means to grow up with dignity. Scarlett's breath caught, her heart twisting. The words weren't a declaration of love, not yet, but they were a vow, stronger than anything Jonathan had ever given her. Jonathan's fury exploded. You'll regret crossing me, both of you. He lunged, his hand reaching for Scarlett's clutch, but Gabriel was faster. He blocked Jonathan's arm, twisting it sharply until Jonathan staggered back with a cry of pain. The dock erupted in gasps, the bystanders' cameras flashing like lightning. For the first time, Jonathan Colton looked small, vulnerable, defeated. Scarlett stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. This ends tonight, Jonathan. No more lies, no more control. Jonathan glared at her, his chest heaving. You think you can beat me with a few papers and a new bodyguard? His gaze cut to Gabriel. I'll destroy you both. But before he could strike again, a voice boomed from behind the crowd. Authoritative, commanding, impossible to ignore. Jonathan Colton, step away. We need to talk. It was a man in a dark suit, flashing a federal badge. The dock fell into stunned silence. The man in the dark suit stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. His voice carried the weight of authority, sharp and undeniable. Jonathan Colton, he repeated, we need to talk. For the first time that night, Jonathan froze, not out of rage, but out of fear. His eyes flicked from the badge to the man's face, then to the crowd of staffers and guests, their phones raised, recording every second. He had thrived on attention his entire career, but this was a spotlight he couldn't spin. Scarlett clutched the envelope tighter, realization dawning. Margaret's warning, the documents, the offshore accounts, it was all connected. Jonathan wasn't just cruel, he was dirty. Jonathan forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? The agent's expression didn't shift. Yes. And that's why we're here. We've been investigating your companies for months. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. That envelope your wife is holding, his eyes flicked to Scarlett, might be the final piece we need. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cassandra's face drained of color. She tried to step back, but Jonathan's grip on her arm tightened like a vice. Don't move, he hissed under his breath. Gabriel stepped closer to Scarlett, his presence steadying her as her knees threatened to give way. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was a war on a scale she had never imagined. Jonathan snarled, his arrogance cracking under the pressure. This is a setup, she's behind it. He jabbed a finger toward Scarlett, his voice desperate. She's framing me because she couldn't handle losing her place at my side. Scarlett's breath hitched, but Gabriel spoke before she could. No, Jonathan, you framed yourself with your greed. The agent nodded. We have enough to take you in for questioning tonight. I suggest you cooperate. Jonathan's fury ignited again. You think you can parade me out of here like a criminal in front of all these people? His voice rose to a shout, his face red with rage. I built this city's future. Without me, half of them wouldn't even have jobs. But his words rang hollow. The crowd that once fawned over him now whispered in disgust. Some even stepped back, as though afraid his corruption might stain them. Cassandra yanked her arm free, her survival instinct stronger than loyalty. "Jonathan, I didn't sign up for this," she spat, her voice trembling. "You never told me about the money." Jonathan turned on her, his voice venomous. "You were happy to spend it, weren't you? Don't you dare play innocent." Scarlett watched, her chest tightening. For years she had endured Jonathan's wrath alone. Now the world was finally seeing it too. The agent signaled to two other men in suits, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Jonathan backed up, wild-eyed, his bravado collapsing. "You can't do this. I'll ruin you, all of you." Gabriel's voice cut through, low but powerful. "You already ruined yourself." Scarlett felt her throat tighten, a strange mix of fear, relief, and disbelief swirling inside her. For so long, Jonathan had been untouchable. Now, under the harsh docklights, he looked small, cornered, desperate, and finally vulnerable. The agents reached for him, and Jonathan thrashed like a trapped animal. "Scarlett," he roared, his voice cracking, "this isn't over. I'll drag you down with me if it's the last thing I do." But before the agents could secure him, Jonathan twisted free and bolted toward the exit, straight in Scarlett's direction, his eyes burning with one last act of vengeance. Jonathan's footsteps thundered against the concrete, his face twisted with rage. His eyes locked on Scarlett like a predator closing in on its prey. For years, she had endured this fury behind closed doors, silenced and afraid. But tonight, there was no place to hide. Tonight, the entire world was watching. Scarlett's instincts screamed at her to retreat, to shrink back the way she had so many times before. But something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the child she carried, the tiny heartbeat reminding her she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. Maybe it was Gabriel, standing only a step away, his steady presence like a wall of strength. Or maybe it was the evidence in her clutch, the proof that Jonathan wasn't invincible. Whatever it was, Scarlett didn't run. She planted her feet. Jonathan lunged, his hand reaching for the envelope, his voice a growl. "You'll regret this, Scarlett. Give it to me." Scarlett's voice rang out, clear and steady. "No." The single word echoed across the loading dock, stronger than any scream. Jonathan froze mid-stride, stunned by her defiance. The crowd of staffers and guests erupted into whispers, their phones capturing every second. For once, Scarlett wasn't the silent wife. She was the woman standing against the monster. Her heart hammered, but her eyes never wavered. "You took my trust. You took my love. You tried to take my dignity, but you will never take my child's future. Not tonight. Not ever." Jonathan's face contorted with disbelief. He had built his entire life on power, control, dominance. And now, the woman he thought he owned stood unbroken before him. "You think you can beat me?" he snarled, his voice cracking. "You're nothing without me." Scarlett lifted her chin, her tears glistening but her voice unwavering. "I was never nothing. You just never saw me." The words struck like a blade. Jonathan faltered, his rage colliding with confusion. For years, Scarlett's silence had been his weapon. Now, her voice was her shield. Gabriel stepped closer, ready to intervene if Jonathan struck. But Scarlett raised a hand, stopping him. This moment wasn't about Gabriel. It wasn't about the agents. It was about her. Jonathan's hand trembled as he reached again, but Scarlett didn't flinch. She pulled the envelope tight against her chest, her other hand pressed protectively over her belly. "You've already lost, Jonathan," she said, her tone final. "You just don't know it yet." The agent surged forward, but Jonathan thrashed, desperate for one last shred of control. He lunged again, his fist raised, not for the envelope this time, but for Scarlett herself. The crowd gasped. Gabriel moved, his muscles tensed to block the blow, but Scarlett stepped forward first. With a sudden, shocking clarity, she raised her voice, louder than the orchestra, louder than the chaos. "Stop!" she commanded. The word carried like thunder. For the first time in years, Jonathan froze, not because of force, but because of the sheer authority in Scarlett's voice. The crowd hushed, the agents halted, even Gabriel paused. Scarlett stared into Jonathan's eyes, unblinking. "Look at me. Look at what you've done. You don't scare me anymore, and you never will again." Her defiance shattered something in him. The power he wielded like a weapon crumbled under her gaze. His raised fist hovered in the air, trembling, then fell uselessly to his side. For the first time, Jonathan looked small. The agent seized the moment, grabbing him by the arms, forcing him to the ground as he kicked and screamed. Scarlett stood motionless, her chest heaving, her body trembling. but her spirit unshaken. Gabriel's hand brushed her arm, grounding her, his voice low and reverent. "Scarlett, you just won." Scarlett's eyes shimmered, her tears finally falling. But this time, they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release. And as Jonathan was dragged away in handcuffs, Cassandra slipped into the shadows, clutching her phone, already plotting her own betrayal. The chaos of Jonathan's arrest lingered in the loading dock like smoke after a fire. The federal agents forced him into a waiting car, his furious shouts muffled by the slam of steel doors. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers buzzing about the empire that had just collapsed before their eyes. For the first time in years, Scarlett stood free of her husband's shadow. But freedom was never simple, not with Cassandra Monroe still lurking nearby. As the last of the agents cleared the dock, Scarlett leaned into Gabriel's steady presence, exhaustion sweeping over her. She thought it was over. She thought Jonathan's downfall would mean peace. She was wrong. Cassandra stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete, her crimson gown catching the harsh fluorescent light. She looked less like a mistress in disgrace and more like a predator circling for her next kill. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The pitiful wife finally found her voice. "Congratulations, Scarlett. You won yourself a headline. But do you really think this changes anything?" Scarlett straightened, her exhaustion giving way to defiance. "Jonathan's gone. It's over." Cassandra laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Over? You think men like Jonathan go down alone? He may be in handcuffs, but his empire, his money, his allies, they don't vanish overnight. And guess what? I know where all the pieces are buried." Gabriel's gaze hardened, stepping between them protectively. "Careful, Cassandra. Your association with him doesn't make you powerful. It makes you complicit." That Cassandra's smirk deepened. "Oh, spare me the lecture, Knight. I was never stupid enough to sign my name on anything. Jonathan took the risks, I took the benefits, and now, with him out of the way, I can take more." Scarlett's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" Cassandra's eyes glittered with malice. "I'm saying that envelope you're holding? It's dangerous. To Jonathan, to you, to anyone who touches it. You think those federal agents are your friends? They'll use you, Scarlett. They'll drag your name through the mud, paint you as the complicit wife who looked away while her husband robbed the world blind." Scarlett's breath caught. For a moment, doubt pierced her resolve. Was Cassandra right? Would exposing Jonathan also destroy her? Gabriel sensed her fear. He placed a reassuring hand on Scarlett's arm. "Don't listen to her. She's desperate. She's trying to twist the truth because she knows she's next." But Cassandra wasn't finished. She leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "Do you really think Gabriel can protect you forever? He may play the knight in shining armor, but men like him always want something. When he gets tired of saving you, Scarlett, you'll be alone again. And when that day comes, I'll be waiting to finish what Jonathan started." Scarlett's chest tightened, her anger sparking. She had endured enough cruelty for a lifetime, but Cassandra's words struck at her deepest wound. The fear of being abandoned, of raising her child in isolation. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's enough." Cassandra's smirk faltered, but she held her ground. "You think this is the end of me? No, Gabriel. This is my beginning. Jonathan may be gone, but I'll inherit what's left of his empire. And when I do, Scarlett will wish she had never crossed me." Her heels clicked as she turned to leave, her gown sweeping dramatically behind her. The sound echoed like a threat etched into stone. Scarlett pressed the envelope tighter to her chest, her breath unsteady. Gabriel leaned close, his voice low but resolute. "She won't win, not while I'm here." But as Scarlett looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the dread curling in her stomach, because Cassandra's warning carried a terrifying truth. The battle wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The city skyline glittered through the penthouse windows, but Scarlett's gaze lingered on the dark horizon. A week had passed since Jonathan's arrest, a week of endless headlines, investigations, and whispers that followed her everywhere. Yet in the quiet of Gabriel's home, far above the chaos, she finally felt something she hadn't in years. Safe. She sat curled on a velvet couch, her hands resting gently on her belly. The envelope of evidence lay locked in Gabriel's safe, guarded more carefully than gold. Margaret had testified, the agents had taken over, and Jonathan's empire was unraveling day by day. Cassandra had vanished into the shadows, her threats lingering like ghosts. But tonight, Scarlett allowed herself a breath of peace. Gabriel entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one before her, his presence steady and grounding. "Chamomile," he said softly. It helped Elena when she couldn't sleep. Scarlett accepted the cup, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You still talk about her," she murmured. Gabriel's eyes softened with memory. "I'll always talk about her. She was part of who I am. But—" He paused, his gaze meeting Scarlett's. "She'd want me to keep living, to find love again, if it came." Scarlett's chest tightened, emotion rising. She had feared being nothing more than a replacement in Gabriel's life. But the honesty in his words, the way he carried Elena's memory without diminishing Scarlett's worth, it was healing in a way she hadn't expected. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but filled with unspoken truths. Scarlett set her tea aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for love again. Not yet. But I do know this. I want a life where I'm not afraid anymore. For me, for my child." Gabriel reached for her hand, his grip warm and protective. "And you'll have it, because you're not alone in this anymore." Scarlett's eyes brimmed with tears, but these weren't tears of pain. They were of release, of gratitude, of hope. For so long she had been silenced, dismissed, broken. Now she felt whole again, piece by fragile piece. Gabriel shifted, reaching into his pocket. Scarlett's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart raced. "Gabriel," she whispered. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a ring, elegant and timeless, a single diamond set on a band engraved with delicate vines. Not flashy, not gaudy, but meaningful. "I'm not asking you to forget your pain," Gabriel said, his voice steady though his eyes glistened. "I'm asking you to let me walk beside you through it, to protect you, to love your child as my own, to build something real, out of honesty, respect, and choice. Will you let me?" Scarlett's breath trembled. For years, she had lived in a marriage that suffocated her, where vows were shackles instead of promises. And now, here was Gabriel, offering her not a cage, but wings. Her hand lifted to her belly, feeling the quiet movement of the life inside. She smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking with relief. He drew her close, pressing his forehead against hers. For the first time in years, Scarlett felt loved, not as an ornament, not as a possession, but as a woman, a mother, a survivor. The future was uncertain. Jonathan's trial loomed. Cassandra's schemes lingered, but Scarlett no longer faced them alone. She had Gabriel. She had her child. She had herself, stronger, braver, and freer than ever before. As the city lights sparkled below, Scarlett whispered a vow of her own. "No one will ever silence me again." And in that moment, the broken wife became the goddess she was always meant to be. So that's how the story closes. My dear friends, you're still here with me until now, aren't you? If you are, then something in Scarlett's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it's the pain of betrayal, maybe it's the courage to rise again, or maybe it's the reminder that, even in our darkest nights, there's always a dawn. The Stoic philosophers used to say, we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. Scarlett could not stop Jonathan's cruelty, but she chose dignity over despair. That choice, that inner strength, is something each of us carries inside, waiting to be awakened. Life will test us. People may hurt us. But healing begins the moment we remember our worth and decide not to be defined by the ones who tried to break us. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Tap the like button, leave your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, because together we're building a space where stories heal and hearts grow stronger. The chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above the grand ballroom, their light bouncing off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. This was no ordinary night. It was the Bright Futures Gala, the most prestigious event of the year. New York's elite were gathered, a sea of tuxedos and gowns worth more than most houses. The air carried the scent of imported roses and vintage champagne, a reminder that money ruled this room. But what no one expected was that tonight, beneath the glamour, a scandal would detonate like a bomb. At the center of the gala, billionaire Jonathan Colton commanded attention. Tall, confident, and wrapped in a designer tuxedo, he moved through the crowd with a smug grin plastered on his face. His hand was not on his wife's arm. It was on Cassandra Monroe's, a woman 10 years younger, dressed in a scarlet gown that hugged her figure like a second skin. Gasps rippled as Jonathan leaned in to whisper in her ear, introducing her to investors and board members as if she were his queen. Cameras clicked. Whispers traveled like wildfire. Everyone knew Jonathan was married. His wife, Scarlett Colton, was 6 months pregnant. Yet here he was, flaunting his mistress as though vows were nothing more than a business deal gone stale. Cassandra basked in the attention, her lips curling into a smile of triumph as she clung tighter to Jonathan's arm. She knew what she represented: power, youth, conquest. And she was shameless about it. Jonathan raised a glass to toast, his voice booming across the hall. "To new beginnings," he declared, the arrogance in his tone as sharp as broken glass. The guests forced polite laughter, though many exchanged uneasy glances. Even among billionaires, some lines weren't meant to be crossed in public. But Jonathan thrived on spectacle. He wanted the world to see him as untouchable. A man who could have it all: fortune, fame, and women. Just as the orchestra swelled with Mozart's Symphony No. 40, the doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with a thunderous crash. Heads turned. A hush swept over the room. There, framed by the golden light of the corridor, stood Scarlett Colton. She wasn't the timid, forgotten wife Jonathan assumed would stay hidden at home. She was breathtaking, radiant and powerful in a white silk gown that draped elegantly over her swollen belly. Her hair shimmered under the chandeliers, her eyes sharp and steady, carrying the weight of betrayal yet refusing to break. Scarlett walked slowly, every step echoing on the marble like a drumbeat of judgment. Murmurs filled the silence. "Is that Scarlett? But she's pregnant. She looks like a goddess." Jonathan froze, his glass trembling in his hand. Cassandra's smile faltered as all eyes shifted away from her. In an instant, the mistress who had soaked in every ounce of attention was forgotten. The room now belonged to Scarlett. Every camera turned, every whisper grew louder. Scarlett's presence was not just a wife walking into a party. It was a reckoning. She stopped at the edge of the stage, her hand resting gently on her belly, and lifted her chin. For the first time in years, Jonathan Colton felt small. And for the first time tonight, Cassandra realized she was no longer the star of the show. Scarlett opened her mouth to speak, and the entire ballroom held its breath. Long before she stunned the gala with her entrance, Scarlett Colton had been a woman who believed in love above all else. She wasn't born into the glittering world of wealth and diamonds. Scarlett grew up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, the daughter of a hard-working nurse and a mechanic who never made much money, but gave her endless love. Her parents taught her that kindness mattered more than titles, and integrity mattered more than wealth. From a young age, Scarlett dreamed of creating beauty. While other children scribbled cartoons, she designed floor plans of imaginary homes. She'd rearrange the furniture in their small living room just to see how light shifted across the walls. That passion carried her to a scholarship at a respected design school, where she studied interior architecture. She poured her heart into creating spaces that made people feel alive. She didn't chase luxury, she chased meaning. Then came Jonathan Colton. He was already rising in the tech world when their paths crossed. He noticed her at a design expo where Scarlett presented a project about affordable housing. She wore a simple dress, nothing that screamed for attention, yet Jonathan saw an opportunity. With his charm and relentless pursuit, he swept her into a whirlwind romance. For Scarlett, who had always lived humbly, Jonathan's grand gestures felt like a fairy tale. Roses delivered to her classroom. Dinners at rooftop restaurants she could never have afforded. Promises of forever whispered beneath city lights. When he proposed, Scarlett believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She gave up her small studio apartment, her freelance projects, and slowly, piece by piece, her independence. Jonathan insisted she didn't need to work, that her place was by his side. At first, it sounded like devotion. Later, it would reveal itself as control. The early years of their marriage shimmered with champagne and red carpets. Scarlett became the polished wife at his side, the one who smiled for photographs, the one magazines labeled graceful and supportive. Yet behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Jonathan's ambition grew ruthless. He spent more time in boardrooms than at home. He mocked Scarlett's desire to return to design work, telling her no one cared about her small dreams when she was married to a titan. And then, the pregnancy. For Scarlett, it was a miracle, the one thing she had longed for. For Jonathan, it was a burden, an inconvenience that clashed with his carefully curated image of freedom and power. He stopped coming to doctor appointments. He began working later, his excuses sharp and impatient. And when Scarlett confronted him, he turned the blame on her. "You're emotional, you're paranoid. Stop embarrassing me." Still, Scarlett clung to the hope that love would prevail. She told herself Jonathan was simply stressed, that fatherhood would soften him. But the late-night phone calls, the perfume lingering on his suits, and the whispered rumors from acquaintances carved at her heart. Deep down, she knew betrayal was already in her home. On the night of the Bright Futures Gala, Scarlett stayed in their mansion alone, staring at the designer gown Jonathan had told her not to wear. "Stay home," he'd said coldly. "The gala is business." But something inside her shifted. For months she had been silent, enduring humiliation in the shadows. That night, she refused to be invisible any longer. She slipped into the white silk gown, placed a protective hand over her belly, and told herself, "Tonight, the world will see me." And so, when she opened those ballroom doors, she wasn't just a pregnant wife. She was a woman rising from the ashes of betrayal, ready to reclaim her dignity. But what Scarlett didn't know was that an unexpected ally was already in the room, watching her every move. The Bright Futures Gala was not just another charity event, it was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. Tickets cost more than most people's annual salary, and invitations were whispered about weeks in advance. For Jonathan Colton, it was the perfect stage. Tonight was supposed to be his triumph, a night where he paraded his power not only through his empire, but also through the woman on his arm. The ballroom itself was a masterpiece. Polished marble stretched endlessly, reflecting the glitter of crystal chandeliers that dripped light like molten diamonds. A live orchestra played Mozart, their instruments blending into a river of elegance that carried across the room. Towering arrangements of Dutch tulips and white orchids adorned each table, their fragrance mingling with the scent of aged champagne. Every detail screamed of extravagance. This was wealth not hidden, but flaunted. At the center, Jonathan basked in attention. With Cassandra Monroe pressed close to his side, he was the sun around which lesser stars orbited. CEOs, senators, and celebrities leaned in to greet him, pretending not to notice the scandalous substitution of his wife. Cassandra thrived under the scrutiny. Her crimson gown shimmered with each step, deliberately bold against the muted gowns around her. She whispered in Jonathan's ear, laughed a little too loudly, and allowed photographers to capture her triumphant smirk. Guests exchanged glances. Some pitied Scarlett, others simply gossiped. But none dared challenge Jonathan publicly. He was, after all, a man who had clawed his way from nothing to billions, and power excused almost anything in this room. Almost. And then came the shift. The grand doors opened, and Scarlett appeared. She did not rush, nor did she falter. Her gown of white silk shimmered with each graceful step, her presence slicing through the opulence like a blade. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses hovered mid-air. For a heartbeat, even the orchestra stumbled before recovering. The atmosphere changed instantly. Scarlett, 6 months pregnant, carried herself with such dignity that whispers rose like wildfire. She came. She looks incredible. She doesn't even look broken. Cameras turned away from Cassandra, their flashes bursting like lightning across Scarlett's calm face. Jonathan's smile stiffened, his fingers tightening around his champagne glass until it nearly cracked. Cassandra's confident posture wilted under the weight of Scarlett's presence. For months, she had been the secret no one dared expose. Tonight, she was being erased in real time. Scarlett moved with deliberate grace across the ballroom. She wasn't just entering a party, she was reclaiming her place, her name, her worth. She paused in the center, her hand resting protectively on her belly, as if reminding everyone of the life she carried, a life Jonathan had carelessly discarded in pursuit of vanity. The silence grew unbearable until Jonathan forced a laugh, raising his voice to pierce the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed. "What a surprise. My wife decided to join us after all." His words dripped with sarcasm, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Scarlett didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Jonathan's, steady, unyielding. "Yes," she said softly, yet her voice carried across the hall. "Your wife decided she wouldn't be hidden tonight." The room erupted in murmurs, the orchestra falling into awkward silence. Every guest could feel it, the balance of power shifting before their eyes. Cassandra shrank back, realizing her role was crumbling with each passing second. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his pride unraveling as Scarlett stood tall, radiant, and unafraid. But while Jonathan fumbled for control and Cassandra wilted in the shadows, another man in the ballroom watched Scarlett with quiet intensity. His name was Gabriel Knight, a billionaire who never flaunted his fortune. Unlike Jonathan, his wealth came with humility, and unlike Cassandra, his gaze carried respect, not hunger. And as Scarlett stood in the spotlight, Gabriel knew this was the moment fate had led him to, though Scarlett herself had no idea yet. Jonathan Colton had always believed he could bend reality to his will. Deals bent to his signature, employees bent to his temper, and the public bent to his carefully crafted image. Tonight, however, the illusion began to crack. Scarlett's presence in the ballroom was a direct threat to the empire of arrogance he had built, and Jonathan wasn't the kind of man who backed down. He tightened his arm around Cassandra's waist, pulling her closer, as though doubling down on his betrayal could erase the humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice louder now, dripping with false cheer, "allow me to introduce Cassandra Monroe. She has been an inspiration, a partner in more ways than one." The words landed like a grenade. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A senator's wife dropped her fork with a clatter. A reporter's hand shot instinctively toward her phone. Jonathan had not only brought his mistress to a gala, he had crowned her in public, right in front of his pregnant wife. Cassandra leaned into the moment, her lips curved into a calculated smile, her hand trailing across Jonathan's chest as if to mark territory. "It's such an honor," she purred, her eyes darting toward Scarlett with open malice. Jonathan deserves someone who can truly stand beside him. The insult was sharp, deliberate. Scarlett's chest tightened, but she refused to bow. Instead, she lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Cassandra's with a calm steel that cut deeper than any retort. She didn't need to scream. Her silence alone was devastating. Yet Jonathan couldn't stand it. The way Scarlett's poise threatened his authority. He stepped forward, gesturing grandly toward Cassandra. "Scarlett, you've had your time. You've played the role of wife well enough, but this—" He looked at Cassandra with pride. "This is the future." The audacity was staggering. Guests whispered furiously, torn between horror and fascination. They had seen affairs before, scandals whispered in corners, but never such a brazen betrayal broadcast in public. Scarlett's hand instinctively went to her belly, grounding herself in the presence of the child she carried. She wanted to scream, to demand how Jonathan could stand there so shamelessly. But instead, she whispered to herself, "Dignity. Hold on to dignity." Across the room, cameras flashed. Jonathan basked in the attention, mistaking shock for admiration. Cassandra clung to him, but beneath her smile there was unease. She hadn't expected Scarlett to show up, and certainly not like this. Radiant, composed, and glowing with the quiet power of motherhood. Scarlett finally spoke, her voice carrying through the hall though it was barely louder than a breath. "You parade her in front of me? In front of our child?" The room froze. Jonathan smirked, arrogance dripping from every word. "Our child will grow up in privilege. What matters is strength, not sentiment." It was the final crack in Scarlett's illusion of marriage. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every quiet night she had spent alone, reduced to nothing by his cruelty. Her eyes shimmered, but she refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not for him. The orchestra faltered into silence, and for a moment the gala was no longer about charity or prestige. It was about the battlefield of a marriage collapsing before hundreds of witnesses. But while Jonathan strutted and Cassandra smirked, another presence lingered on the edges of the crowd. Gabriel Knight, his expression unreadable, studied Scarlett. He saw not weakness, but extraordinary courage. He had known betrayal himself. He had known loss. And in Scarlett's quiet defiance, he recognized a strength that deserved protection. As Scarlett stood alone against Jonathan's humiliation, Gabriel began to move forward, ready to change everything with a single step.
Welcome back to our channel, everyone. In our heart-stirring story, Millionaire CEO walks into wrong restroom and can't believe his eyes. The most surprising moment involves our powerful CEO standing in the pouring rain, confessing his love to the one person he never expected to fall for. Can you imagine the look on everyone's faces when the man who always had it all finally realizes that love, not money, might be his greatest treasure? If you're curious about how it all leads to that dramatic, rain-soaked declaration, be sure to listen to the entire story from start to finish. We promise it's a journey filled with tension, unexpected twists, and tender revelations. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another unforgettable tale. And feel free to comment with your personal reactions, theories, or favorite parts of the story. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what you think about this epic conclusion. The executive conference room high atop Stone Global Industries was hushed to the point of suffocation. The sleek glass walls offered a panorama of the bustling metropolis outside. But inside, no one dared so much as shuffle a sheet of paper. Tension hung as thick as the expensive cologne that clung to the air. At the head of a long mahogany table stood Nathan Stone, the formidable millionaire CEO whose name alone could unnerve even the most seasoned professionals. His tall frame was accentuated by a perfectly tailored suit, and his silver watch gleamed under the fluorescent lights with an almost hypnotic shine. Normally, the man was known for his calm, icy demeanor, but this morning he was anything but calm. Right now, his voice was clipped and dangerous, slicing through the tense atmosphere like a serrated knife. "This is completely unacceptable," Nathan growled, slapping a thick folder against the polished tabletop. A murmur seemed to ripple through the group of executives seated around him, though no one spoke. Stone Global Industries had poured enormous resources into this new initiative, and the dismal quarterly results had set everyone on edge. The data was laid out in front of them, millions invested, negligible returns, and a looming sense that they were underperforming. Nathan's steely gray eyes flicked to each executive in turn, daring someone to speak up. Eventually, Michael Donovan, a middle-aged VP with slightly trembling hands, cleared his throat and tried to offer a defense. "Sir, the market's reaction was nothing like our initial forecast. We're analyzing," he began, but Nathan cut him off harshly. "Stop," Nathan demanded, voice low and full of ire. "All I'm hearing is excuses, Donovan. This is Stone Global, not some minor startup hoping for a lucky break. We dominate, period." He slammed the folder down once more, making a few of the junior associates flinch in their seats. For a heartbeat, it looked as if no one would dare argue, not when Nathan Stone was in one of these moods. But from the opposite side of the table came a voice both steady and fearless. "Nathan," said Alessia Parker, a younger yet incredibly insightful financial strategist, "maybe we're focusing too hard on chasing profits without accounting for the workforce's well-being. Overexertion, lack of staff support, those can affect results just as much as raw numbers." She folded her arms and held his gaze in a way few dared to do. Alessia had witnessed Nathan's fury on more than one occasion, but even she was taken aback by the intensity in his eyes today. He scowled, the tension in his jaw so tight it might snap. "Since when did the bottom line hinge on feelings?" he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "This company isn't a sympathy project. Our purpose is to thrive in every market we touch." "I'm not saying feelings should dictate strategy," Alessia countered, lifting her chin. "But a balance is crucial. Burned-out employees underproduce. Departments that feel undervalued or neglected fail to innovate. It's a cycle that always costs more down the road." Nathan stared at her, a storm of irritation swirling behind his gaze. His entire demeanor seemed to vibrate with anger at the suggestion that Stone Global might be anything less than invincible. Still, Alessia refused to back down, clinging to her argument as if it were a life raft in a sea of corporate tension. After a long, simmering pause, Nathan lifted a hand in a dismissive gesture. "Everyone out," he finally declared, tone so ice-cold it could have chilled the entire floor. "I've heard enough. I expect fresh answers on my desk by tomorrow. Not the same old runaround." Like ripples spreading across a calm surface, the executives rose from their chairs in near silence, anxious to escape Nathan's searing glare. Alessia pressed her lips together, frustration etched onto her features, but she left without protest. Nathan stood there for a moment longer, his knuckles whitening against the edge of the mahogany table, mind churning as if trying to will a solution into existence. Once he exited the conference room, the cacophony of the outer offices reached him, a hushed chorus of ringing phones, murmured conversations, and the occasional ding from an elevator. He pushed forward, each step carrying him down the marble corridor with a sense of urgency. Each day felt like a battle, and while he was no stranger to conflict, this one felt personal. Approaching the tinted glass doors that led to the restrooms, Nathan realized just how badly he needed a moment to himself. Maybe a splash of cold water would quell the pounding behind his temples. Without thinking, he shoved open a door, entirely unaware that he was heading into the women's restroom. Paragraph 2, approx. 500 plus words. The bright overhead lighting inside was a small mercy, but everything else felt off the moment Nathan stepped in. His polished Oxfords tapped across the tiled floor as he rolled his sleeves up. The tension in his neck refused to ease. He leaned over one of the sinks, turning the tap to run cold water over his wrists. The coolness felt like a temporary relief, though not nearly enough to shake off the frustration of that disastrous meeting. That was when he heard it, a muffled sound that could have been a sob or a gasp. Nathan went entirely still, water running over his hands in a silent stream. Slowly, he turned his head, zeroing in on the far corner of the restroom. At first glance, he thought the corner was empty. Then he spotted movement. A figure huddled against the wall, knees drawn close to the chest. A woman with dark hair partially veiling her face was curled into herself in a protective ball. Her clothes looked wrinkled and possibly stained, as if she had been wearing them for days. She was so still he might have overlooked her, if not for that sound, the quiet trembling of suppressed tears. For a second, the unstoppable CEO wasn't sure what to do. Clearing his throat, Nathan took a careful step forward. "Hello," he said, the authority in his voice toned down to something calmer. In an instant, the woman reacted like a frightened animal. She scrambled to her feet, pressing her back against the wall, as though she expected him to strike. Her face was partly obscured by messy strands of hair, but her hazel eyes burned with equal parts fear and defiance. Nathan raised his palms slightly, trying to appear non-threatening. "Who are you?" she snapped. Her tone wavered, revealing a mix of terror and exhaustion. He found himself momentarily speechless, which was rare for the man known to reduce boardrooms to silence with a few well-chosen words. Another realization then smacked him: the sign outside. This was, in fact, the women's restroom. How had he... He glanced at the sign near the door, noticing the female figure icon, and internally groaned. Of all the mistakes he could make today, barging into the wrong restroom was not on the list he'd anticipated. This is... He started, struggling to find a coherent explanation. "I didn't realize..." But the woman, her gaze darting from him to the exit, had other worries on her mind. She appeared to be bracing herself for an attack, her body coiled tight as a spring. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice hinted that she wasn't sure how to handle the situation either. Nathan hesitated, scanning her tattered attire and noticing the subtle trembling of her arms. Something about her posture told him she was too proud to let her fear show outright. "Look," he said, carefully lowering his voice, "this is clearly a misunderstanding. I'm Nathan Stone. I came in by mistake." He paused, feeling odd to be giving out his name like this, as though it would magically solve the situation. But an uneasy silence followed. He glanced around, awkwardly aware of the feminine decor that confirmed he was far out of place. Are you all right?" he ventured, stepping back to give her space. "Do I look all right?" the woman asked bitterly. She tugged at the hem of her worn sweater, attempting to straighten it. Even from a short distance, Nathan could see that the garment was threadbare. She looked nothing like one of his polished employees. Her eyes darted to the door again, as though checking to see if she had a path to escape. "What are you doing in here?" Nathan asked, genuinely perplexed. He knew the night cleaning crew wore uniforms, and he recognized most employees who worked on this floor. She didn't look like a temp or a visitor. Her cheeks reddened, either from shame or indignation, maybe both. She squared her shoulders, defiance momentarily eclipsing her fear. I, I used to work for Stone Global, she said, voice tight with resentment. They laid me off 2 weeks ago, along with a bunch of other people in my department. I came by to pick up my last paycheck. The HR staff gave me the runaround. I got tired of waiting. Nathan's brow furrowed. He knew about recent layoffs, but he didn't recall seeing this specific person on the list. Then again, the CEO of a massive conglomerate rarely had personal knowledge of every individual. He tried to picture this woman in a business casual outfit, maybe scanning through spreadsheets or racing around to handle phone calls. It was difficult to imagine, given the state she was in now. She let out a shaky breath, hugging her arms to her chest. I just needed somewhere quiet, she continued, looking away as though embarrassed. You probably think I'm trespassing, and maybe I am, but I don't have anywhere else to go. A hush settled between them. Nathan wasn't sure how to respond. On one hand, he had an entire empire to manage, and his day was already spiraling. On the other hand, something about her desperation tugged at him, though he struggled to name the feeling. Then the woman sighed, half in resignation. I'm Jade Martin, she offered flatly, as if her name were the last piece of dignity she had left. Nathan glimpsed the door sign again, cursing under his breath for causing this bizarre confrontation. Well, Ms. Martin, he said, trying for a neutral tone, it seems we've both made some mistakes today. Paragraph 3, approx 500 plus words. Neither of them moved for several seconds, the awkwardness almost tangible. Jade stood there, muscles tense, as though prepared for an onslaught of accusations. Nathan Stone, the man with more power than nearly anyone else in the building, was trying to think of a way to defuse the situation. He had come in here simply to clear his head, not to discover someone else fighting her own unseen battles. It was the sight of Jade's quivering hand, lightly brushing over her rumpled sweater, that finally propelled him into action. Listen, he said, snapping back into his executive composure. You shouldn't be here. This is restricted to employees and authorized visitors. But he found himself hesitating, something that rarely happened. But I also see that you're in a tough position. I won't call security if that's what you're worried about. She snorted softly, anger coloring her features. Oh, wow. Should I be grateful? Her hazel eyes flared with a mix of resentment and lingering embarrassment. The almighty CEO won't have me thrown out like a piece of trash. How generous. Nathan's lip tightened. He wasn't accustomed to this level of open defiance, certainly not from someone who had once held a position in his firm's finance department. He was used to employees who avoided eye contact when he passed in the corridors, or who fawned over him at corporate functions. This was new, and he wasn't entirely sure how to handle it. Yet there was a spark in Jade that he couldn't dismiss. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't pleading. She was simply standing there, unyielding in her adversity. I'm offering you a chance to avoid a permanent ban from this building, he said, controlling the frustration in his voice. Take it or leave it. While he might have intended to sound stern, his tone came out less severe than he'd expected. She regarded him carefully as though trying to gauge if he was setting some kind of trap. I only need my paycheck, she said at length. I was told it would be processed today, but they keep pushing me off. I'm almost out of time. Her voice broke slightly at the end, betraying how dire her situation was. Nathan's chest tightened with an unfamiliar pang. The notion that someone who once contributed to his company could be on the brink of homelessness unsettled him. I'll talk to HR, Nathan decided, trying to end the conversation on a note of finality. They'll get your payment sorted, but as far as re-entering the premises, that part is out of my hands. Jade studied him a moment, as if calculating whether she believed him. Then, to his surprise, she offered a short nod of grudging acceptance. The tension between them hadn't vanished, but it had receded enough to make breathing in that enclosed space easier. A sudden commotion echoed from the corridor. Voices, footsteps. Nathan glanced over his shoulder, remembering exactly where he was. The last thing he needed was an office rumor about the CEO lurking in the women's restroom. We'd better move, he muttered, gesturing toward the door. Jade tensed again, her posture rigid as she followed his lead. A flicker of fear seemed to cross her face, as though she worried that stepping into the hallway might expose her to humiliation or worse. We're fine, he assured her quietly, as if he were used to smoothing over PR nightmares with calm confidence. Just walk out. Nobody will notice. Even as he said the words, he realized how naive they might sound to someone who felt like an outcast. Yet they managed to exit without drawing attention. Nathan's imposing presence alone was enough to deter onlookers from probing questions. Office staff parted in the corridor like a tide, more focused on not catching the CEO's irritated stare. Once they reached the main lobby, Jade halted abruptly. She looked around, disoriented, as though she didn't quite believe she was free to leave without escort. Outside, dark clouds gathered above the glass entrance, threatening a downpour at any moment. Nathan paused next to her, uncertain whether he should see her off or retreat to his own responsibilities. Part of him wanted to wash his hands of this entire fiasco. He had crises piling up and an entire corporate empire to steer. Yet another part of him, buried deep, felt oddly compelled to ensure she was all right. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked in a low voice. Immediately, he regretted the question because of the look she gave him, an incredulous, fiery gaze that said, "You're too late to care now." But even so, she allowed herself to answer. "I'll manage," she said, chin lifted defiantly. "I always do." With that, she pivoted on her heel and walked off, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Nathan stood there watching as she pushed through the revolving doors into the gusty air outside, her posture a tense combination of sorrow and pride. He told himself that was the end of it. She was just another ex-employee, a casualty of the business world. He had his own problems to focus on. Yet as the large glass doors swung shut behind her, he found himself still thinking about Jade Martin and the determined spark in her eyes. Paragraph 4, approx 500 plus words. That evening, the city was swallowed by a relentless rainstorm, the kind that clogs gutters and drenches sidewalks in minutes. Nathan Stone was still holed up in his office, reviewing spreadsheets and crisis reports. The fiasco earlier in the day had put him further behind schedule. Worse, a major project his firm had invested in was showing signs of collapse, and some of his top executives were whispering about an impending disaster if the losses weren't contained. As the rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, Nathan rubbed his temples, feeling a migraine brewing. Yet despite the barrage of urgent emails and phone calls, his mind kept circling back to Jade Martin. He replayed the bathroom scene, her scared, defiant posture, and how she refused to grovel or take pity. By all logic, he should have dismissed the incident, but something about her vulnerability and her pride hit him in an uncomfortable place. It reminded him of himself decades ago, when he was just a hungry young man who clawed his way through an unforgiving world. He told himself to drop it, but the memory gnawed at him. At nearly midnight, weary from battling spreadsheets and contracts, Nathan finally decided to head home. The lamp-lit streets glistened with puddles as his driver navigated the town car through traffic. Then, at a red light, he saw a lone figure on the sidewalk, huddled under the awning of a closed cafe. The person's soaked sweater clung to their body, and the angle of the lamppost revealed a familiar flash of dark hair. On an impulse that surprised even himself, Nathan signaled his driver to pull over. Rolling down the window, he was met with the sight of Jade Martin, drenched and shivering. She looked up, eyes wide, when the car stopped alongside her. "Get in," Nathan ordered, not caring if he sounded rude. The wind whipped rain into the car, and Jade took a startled step back. She looked as if she might run, but then recognized him. Her eyes flickered with that same mixture of defiance and vulnerability. She hesitated, but only for a moment. Something in his expression, or perhaps her own exhaustion, convinced her to accept. She climbed into the back seat, her damp clothes staining the leather upholstery. "Thank you," she mumbled, voice rough with fatigue. Nathan gestured for the driver to continue. The interior of the car was warm, which only emphasized just how cold Jade must have been. She tried to wring out the sleeves of her sweater, wincing as water dripped onto the floor mats. Though she was grateful to be out of the downpour, she clearly felt uneasy, as if anticipating a lecture or a trap. "Where do you live?" Nathan asked quietly. "I can drop you off." Jade was silent for a long moment, eyes glued to the city lights rushing past outside. Finally, she exhaled and gave an address, one that Nathan recognized as a rundown neighborhood on the opposite side of the city from his penthouse. He said nothing, but he wondered how she'd ended up in such dire conditions. "Why'd you stop?" Jade asked abruptly, turning to face him. Her features, highlighted by passing headlights, displayed raw suspicion. "Is this part of your damage control routine? Making sure a former employee doesn't file some lawsuit against you?" Nathan frowned but kept his tone level. "No, I just saw you out in the rain. Figured a ride was the least I could offer." It felt strange to him, explaining himself. Usually his actions were guided by corporate strategy, not empathy. Jade's shoulders remained tense, but she nodded once, and the tension in the back seat eased a fraction. They arrived at a small, worn apartment building, one of those with peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. Before Jade could reach for the door handle, Nathan took out his wallet, pulled out several bills, and held them out to her. "Here," he said, voice clipped with a blend of impatience and concern. "A dry place to stay. Groceries. Whatever you need." Her reaction was immediate. The color rose in her cheeks, and she jerked her head as if he'd slapped her. "I'm not your charity case," she spat, refusing to take the money. Nathan drew in a slow breath. Every logical bone in his body told him this was an absurd refusal. She was visibly struggling. Why wouldn't she accept help? "It's just money," he said, trying to sound practical. "I have it. You need it. That's how this works." But Jade's lips pressed into a tight line. She flung the car door open and stepped out into the drizzle, glaring at him over the open door's edge. "I'd rather earn my own way," she declared, hair dripping around her face. "Keep your cash, Nathan Stone." With that, she slammed the door, leaving him in stunned silence. The driver cleared his throat awkwardly, and Nathan signaled him to drive on. But he couldn't shake the lingering image of Jade Martin, soaked and proud, daring to spurn his charity. In a world where everyone seemed to have a price, Jade acted like she was above the currency. And that was the moment he realized he might never be able to forget her. Paragraph 5, approx. 500 plus words. For a while they didn't see each other. Jade had no reason to venture back into Stone Global's domain, and Nathan had every reason to focus on saving his faltering project. But fate, or misfortune, had a knack for bringing people together under impossible circumstances. A few days later, in the sleek, bustling lobby of Stone Global, Jade was spotted loitering near the reception desk. She was flipping through the help-wanted ads in a worn newspaper, occasionally darting glances at the security staff with obvious wariness. Nathan noticed her from across the polished granite floor. He was on his way to a meeting, pressed for time, but their gazes locked for a tense heartbeat. She looked just as weary as before, though a trace of determination hardened her expression. Inexplicably, he veered toward her, ignoring the perplexed stares of colleagues. "Jade?" he said, voice neutral. Security guards hovered near the perimeter, uncertain whether to intervene. Jade's jaw tightened. She closed the newspaper as if to shield its contents from prying eyes. "I'm still waiting on that paycheck," she muttered, gaze sliding toward the elevator banks. "HR has stalled me, again." Nathan frowned, recalling his promise to resolve the issue. The simplest solution would be to march Jade straight to the HR director and sort it out on the spot. But one glance at Jade's defensive stance told him she expected confrontation at every turn. "Come with me," he said instead, motioning for her to follow as he strode across the lobby. Jade hesitated only a moment before trailing after him. Employees parted to let them pass, a few whispering behind their hands. Nathan wasn't oblivious to the rumor mill. The CEO walking side by side with someone in tattered jeans was definitely out of the ordinary. Still, he continued unbothered, entering a private elevator that whirred them up to the executive floors. When the doors slid open onto a plush carpet, Jade looked uneasy. She'd once worked in a lesser department downstairs, never up here among the top brass. Nathan, scanning her posture, recognized the war within her, gratitude for any help and a fierce desire to maintain her independence. He guided her to his spacious office, ignoring the inquisitive stares from passing assistants. Inside, he gestured for her to sit in one of the ergonomic chairs. "Let me handle this," he said, picking up his phone to contact HR directly. Jade perched on the edge of the seat, eyes darting around the impressive space. High windows, modern art, a mahogany desk that cost more than some small cars. She bit her lip, clearly feeling out of place. After a short conversation, Nathan hung up, turned his gaze on her, and announced, "They're cutting you a check by the end of the day. No more runaround." "Thanks," Jade said quietly, fiddling with the frayed hem of her sweater. Her voice lacked the anger he'd grown used to. Perhaps relief was starting to crack her usual barrier. Nathan was about to usher her out when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from a top executive. Meetings had been rescheduled, issues demanded attention, and a last-minute investor pitch needed organizing. He exhaled sharply, frustration coiling within. It was going to be another grueling day. As he scrolled through the files on his laptop, a half-formed idea popped into his head. His current administrative assistant, Claire, was good at some tasks, but lacked the initiative he needed during a corporate crisis. Jade, on the other hand, had an aggressive intelligence about her. She was unafraid to speak her mind, qualities that might actually help him in navigating the storm ahead. The notion sounded ludicrous, even to himself. Yet a glimmer of possibility formed. "Could you use a job?" he asked abruptly, still focused on his computer screen. Jade frowned, thinking this was some sort of trick. After all, she was about to be free of this place. "I'm in need of a temporary assistant," Nathan added, leaning back in his leather chair. "It won't be glamorous, and it certainly won't be easy, but it pays well." Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Why me?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "We both know we don't exactly get along." Nathan shrugged, trying to sound casual, despite feeling an odd intensity beneath it all. "You said you wanted to earn your way, right? This is a chance, and I need someone sharp who won't crumble under pressure. You showed you can handle yourself even when things get tough." He left out that her unyielding defiance intrigued him, almost as much as it annoyed him. Jade's gaze flicked to the stack of files on his desk, and a complicated emotion crossed her features. Some combination of desperation, pride, and maybe curiosity. After a moment, she exhaled in a surrendering gesture. "Fine, I'll do it," she answered, as if the words tasted bitter on her tongue. "But don't expect me to play corporate pawn. I'll handle the task, but I'm not kissing your shoes, Stone." For a moment, Nathan almost smiled. "Trust me, I wouldn't dream of it." Thus, Jade Martin found herself returning to Stone Global in a very different capacity. Neither of them knew just how tightly their fates would intertwine in the chaos to come. Paragraph 6, approx 500 plus words. In the days that followed, the entire office felt the shift. Jade, who'd once been a mid-level finance employee, now found herself at the right hand of the CEO, albeit temporarily. The arrangement baffled everyone. Rumors flew that Jade had some damaging information on Nathan, or that she had charmed him into giving her a second chance. The truth was simpler yet stranger. Nathan Stone recognized her tenacity, and Jade needed the paycheck. Together, they formed a reluctant alliance. Jade's first assignments were less than glamorous. Meticulously reorganizing the CEO's massive backlog of emails, double-checking data for major contracts, even fetching coffee when needed. She did it all without complaint, though she rarely hid her exasperation when Nathan made last-minute demands. For his part, Nathan pretended not to notice her biting remarks and the eye rolls she sent his way when she thought he wasn't looking. And he was sure to test her. Sudden changes to his schedule, frantic phone calls requiring immediate research, investor meetings where she had to stand by and record critical notes. One evening, well past normal quitting time, they were both poring over budget proposals at the large conference table in his office. The overhead lighting cast a harsh glare, and stacks of documents loomed around them. Nathan glanced at Jade, who was highlighting figures with single-minded focus. A pang of guilt flickered through him. This wasn't her dream job. She was only here due to circumstances beyond her control. Yet he had to admit she was saving him from drowning in administrative chaos during a pivotal moment for Stone Global. "You're good at this," he offered in a low voice, trying to convey something akin to respect. Jade looked up, a skeptical arch to her eyebrow. "Are you complimenting me, Stone? Better be careful. Your reputation as the Ice King might melt," she teased, though her expression softened for a split second. Nathan's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to employees teasing him so casually. But Jade wasn't a typical employee. She clearly refused to be intimidated by him. "I'm stating a fact," he clarified, flipping through a binder. "You have an eye for detail and a knack for organization." His words felt awkward, as though praising her put him on unsteady ground. Jade gave a small shrug, fiddling with the corner of the page. "It's not that different from what I used to do," she admitted. "I was in finance, sure, but they had me doing tasks similar to an assistant's role half the time. That's part of why I got laid off. My role wasn't deemed essential." Her voice thickened with residual bitterness. Nathan sensed the underlying hurt, even if she masked it with cynicism. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from one of his senior executives. "Caleb Trenton is asking for a meeting. Something about new compliance concerns." Nathan grimaced. Caleb was a high-ranking figure in Stone Global, recognized for an enviable track record in corporate negotiations. Lately, though, something about him had struck Nathan as off. He couldn't place it, just a feeling that the man might be involved in questionable deals. Nathan rose, gesturing at Jade to follow. "We need to hear him out," he said, stepping into the hallway. She shoved her pen behind her ear and grabbed a notepad, not wanting to miss a single detail. The corridor leading to the main executive suite was eerily quiet at that hour. A few staff lingered, but most desks were empty. As they approached Caleb's office, Jade noticed how the plush carpeting seemed to absorb every footstep, making the moment feel all the more suspenseful. Inside, Caleb Trenton was waiting with a forced smile. He was tall, slender, and wore an impeccable suit. Every hair in place, posture exuding confidence. But when he greeted Nathan, his dark eyes flickered toward Jade with a flash of irritation. "I didn't realize we'd have company," Caleb said, extending a handshake to Nathan but pointedly ignoring Jade. "She's my temporary assistant," Nathan said, voice lacking any warmth. "Anything you need to discuss with me, you can say in front of her." If Caleb was displeased, he hid it behind a thin, polite smile, launching into a rehearsed explanation of certain compliance hiccups that might affect Stone Global's next big venture. Jade took notes diligently, but her gut told her something here was amiss. Caleb's manner was too slick, too rehearsed. He emphasized how crucial it was that no one outside top management discovers certain gray areas in the contracts, and at times it sounded as though he was testing how far he could push boundaries without setting off alarm bells. After the meeting, as they walked back, Jade confided softly, "I don't trust him." Nathan, pressing the elevator button, met her gaze. An invisible tension passed between them, the silent acknowledgement that Jade's instincts might be correct. The elevator doors opened and they stepped in, exhausted but united in suspicion. Paragraph 7, approx. 500 plus words. The next few days at Stone Global exploded into chaos. Headlines blasted across financial news networks. Stone Global investigated for fraudulent deals. A wave of media scrutiny poured over Nathan's enterprise. Stockholders frantically called for emergency board meetings, and employees whispered about possible arrests. In the center of it all was Nathan Stone, refusing to wilt despite the swirling accusations. On the surface, he was stoic, addressing press statements with a calm facade. Beneath that veneer, he fought to keep his temper in check. The allegations suggested that he, personally, had authorized dubious transactions that reeked of insider trading and fraudulent gain. In her makeshift workstation adjacent to Nathan's office, Jade pored over digital documents, trying to find evidence that would exonerate him. The more she dug, the more she realized how cleverly someone had masked the paper trail. It was only by cross-referencing older archive files, ones from before the digital overhaul, that Jade discovered a link to Caleb Trenton. Certain suspicious contracts bore a manipulated version of Nathan's digital signature, filed on dates that contradicted travel records. In plain terms, it appeared that Caleb had orchestrated a scheme to funnel funds and pin the guilt on Nathan once suspicion arose. The revelation left Jade's heart pounding. If her hunch was correct, Caleb was the spider weaving a web intended to snare Nathan. Determined to share what she'd found, she rushed to gather the evidence. But fate had another twist. As Jade left the building one evening, two men in dark suits intercepted her by the parking structure. One grabbed her arm, gripping it just hard enough to bruise. His voice was low and threatening. "Stop digging, Miss Martin," he warned. "This isn't your fight." Fear pulsed through her veins. She clenched her fists, instinct screaming for her to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Get your hands off me," she demanded, managing to keep her voice from trembling. The second man cast a cold glance, releasing her arm but looming close enough to intimidate. "For your own safety," he said. "Walk away now." Then they vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving Jade rattled and furious. Her hands shook as she called Nathan from her cell, breath hitching as she recounted the threat. Within minutes, his car arrived, tires screeching on the wet pavement. Nathan stepped out, eyes blazing. He took one look at the red marks on her arm and demanded, "Who did this?" Jade could scarcely form words, swallowing hard before relaying the details. Anger radiated off him in near tangible waves. She wasn't sure she'd ever seen him so close to losing composure. "Come with me," he ordered. They drove back to Stone Global, bypassing security as they headed straight to his office. Nathan locked the door behind them. For hours, they pored over the evidence Jade had collected. Piece by piece, they identified how Caleb had manipulated the chain of command, forging Nathan's e-signature while ensuring plausible deniability for himself. Jade's heart raced at each new incriminating detail. Beyond the corporate sabotage, Caleb had hired goons to intimidate her, and there was no telling what he might do if cornered. Finally, at dawn, they had enough to confront him and to take to the authorities. Jade slumped back in her chair, exhaustion sweeping through her. Nathan looked equally spent, tie loosened, hair rumpled. He glanced at her, voice cracking from the night's tension. "You could have walked away. Why risk your neck for me?" Jade's gaze fell to the scattered printouts. This was the moment for honesty. She could dodge his question with sarcasm, but the events of the night had stripped them both of pretense. "Because it's the right thing to do," she answered softly, lifting her weary eyes to his. "And despite everything, I don't believe you deserve to be ruined by someone else's greed." Their locked eyes shared an unspoken current, a rare sense of trust, perhaps even admiration. Finally, Nathan gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the enormity of her choices. Caleb Trenton was arrested, the evidence laid bare before internal auditors and law enforcement. He put up a fight, no doubt, accusing Nathan of framing him. But the data Jade uncovered was damning. Within days, Stone Global's stock began to stabilize. The worst of the scandal was over, even if some residual reputational damage had to be repaired. Through it all, Jade stood at Nathan's side, refusing to yield to any intimidation. They had formed an unlikely partnership. But as the dust settled, reality flooded back. Her original position at Stone Global had never been reinstated. The temporary assistant role had served its purpose. Now Jade was free to leave, no strings attached, paycheck in hand. On her final day, she cleaned out the small desk in the corner of Nathan's office, placing a single photo of her late mother into her bag. That photo was one of the few possessions she valued deeply, reminding her how far she'd come since losing her mother. She told herself she should feel relieved, yet an inexplicable heaviness weighed in her chest. Paragraph 8, approximates 700 plus words. Within 450, 6666 is requested, but we must exceed 4,000 words overall. We'll keep it close to the upper limit. That last morning, Jade kept her head down. She wanted to leave quietly, to avoid the swirl of corporate gossip. The door to Nathan's office was half open, revealing him at his desk, reviewing documents with that signature laser focus. He looked up the instant he sensed movement, and a flicker of something crossed his features. Relief, maybe, or regret. Steeling herself, Jade mustered a formal tone. "I'm heading out," she said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for, everything." Nathan set his pen down, leaning back in his leather chair. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then, with a sigh that revealed more fatigue than he intended, he nodded. "You don't have to go," he said, surprising her. "I'm sure we can find a permanent role for someone with your abilities." His voice carried that no-nonsense edge, but beneath it lay genuine sincerity. Jade inhaled sharply. She had prepared for an easy exit, braced for an indifferent farewell. A job offer wasn't what she expected. She gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not sure Stone Global is where I belong," she said, gazing around the plush office. "Too many complicated memories. I appreciate the offer, but I need a fresh start. Something that's truly mine." As the words left her lips, she realized she wasn't merely talking about a job. She was speaking about all the fear, resentment, and unspoken tension that had accrued like a debt she couldn't repay. Nathan's gaze darkened in understanding. For an eternal second, she wondered if he'd stand up and try to convince her otherwise. But he remained seated, scanning her face as if searching for any trace of doubt. She stood firm, shoulders back. Without a word, Nathan pulled open a desk drawer and took out a small envelope. He extended it toward her, and Jade eyed it warily. "It's just a reference letter," he said. "Nothing more. But a glowing recommendation from me might help you land on your feet somewhere else." She could hear a subtle note of regret in his tone, and her heart squeezed unexpectedly. Taking the envelope, she nodded once. "Thank you," she whispered. The day wore on in a blur of goodbyes, or lack thereof, because Jade avoided most people. She left the building during the lunch lull, stepping into the bright midday sun. It felt anticlimactic. She was free but weighted by a curious sense of loss. A short while later, in a small, out-of-the-way cafe, she nursed a lukewarm coffee and stared at the envelope that Nathan had given her. Part of her wanted to open it, see what he'd written about her, but a bigger part of her was afraid. "Why should I care?" she berated herself. "He's just my ex-boss, a man who runs a corporation I once despised." And yet she couldn't deny their connection. Their shared experiences these last few weeks, prying open dark corners of Stone Global, weathering a corporate scandal, facing intimidation, had forged something she'd never felt with anyone else. Finally, with a surge of frustration, she pushed her coffee aside and left the cafe. She had to move forward, even if some corner of her heart urged her to go back. Days slid into a week. Jade updated her resume, sent out applications, and tried to let go of the lingering images of Nathan Stone. She pictured him behind his desk, pulling all-nighters to manage the next crisis. Or perhaps he was in the board of directors meeting, announcing a recovery plan. Each time she caught herself imagining his life, she scolded herself. Their paths were diverging. She was supposed to start anew. Then one rainy evening, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm outside. Please come down." Something about those few words made her pulse race. Peeking out from her small apartment window, she saw a familiar black car parked at the curb. Despite every argument she'd rehearsed in her head, Jade couldn't ignore the rapid flutter in her chest. She grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs. Nathan stood under a swaying street lamp, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His posture was rigid, eyes locked on her as she stepped out. "Are you crazy?" she blurted, hurrying forward. "You'll catch pneumonia standing out here." He just stared at her, breath shallow as if bracing for her rejection. Jade realized he wore no umbrella, no coat, just a damp suit. "I had to see you," he said, voice clipped from cold and an odd desperation. "I couldn't let it end like that. Someone to, Jade's heart twisted in her chest. She was about to reply, some mixture of exasperation and concern, when he continued, "I love you, Jade Martin." The words hit her like an electric shock. Standing there in the pouring rain, the millionaire CEO, who once dismissed empathy as weakness, was laying himself bare. Her throat tightened, memories of all their heated exchanges and fragile moments swirling in her mind. She recalled how he'd kept his guard up with everyone, how a single slip of kindness was his rare currency. She drew a shaky breath, her usual bravado faltering. "Nathan," she started, not even sure how to respond to something so raw, so unexpected. He took a half step forward, close enough for her to see the droplets of rain sliding down his lashes. "I'm not asking for a grand gesture," he said, voice nearly drowned by the thunder in the distance. "I just need you to know how I feel. I can't forget what we went through, what you showed me, how you risked everything when you had nothing to gain." Emotions tangled in her chest. She had never pictured this moment, this powerful man practically pleading in the rain. Jade was used to being alone, forging ahead because no one else cared enough to walk beside her. Yet here he was. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound of the rain fill her ears before opening them again, tears mixing with the droplets on her cheeks. "You're impossible," she whispered, stepping closer. He gave a reluctant half-smile. "So I've been told." Then his expression softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through. "But I can change, Jade. Or at least, I want to try. Because after losing almost everything, my reputation, my company's trust, the scariest thing was thinking I might lose you too." A soft sob escaped her lips. She reached up, touching his cheek. The once unapproachable CEO felt more human in that moment than she ever thought possible. "We'll have to figure this out together," she said shakily. "I don't have all the answers, and we might screw it up." A wave of relief washed over his features. Then, without another word, his arms pulled her close, and they kissed under the sheeting rain, each of them trembling from a potent mix of cold and adrenaline, and something that felt achingly like hope. Yes, Jade Martin and Nathan Stone had met in the most humiliating circumstances. He barged into the wrong restroom on a bad day, and she was a laid-off employee hiding from the world's judgment. It should have ended in disaster. Instead, it led them both on a path of discovery, forcing them to confront their own insecurities, pride, and vulnerabilities. The scandal that threatened to destroy Stone Global became an unforeseen bridge between them. And though they still had a lifetime of obstacles to face, both corporate and personal, they had learned that empathy and trust could be as powerful as any business deal. As the stormy night wore on, they found refuge not in an opulent mansion or a glossy boardroom, but in the simple knowledge that love could flourish in the darkest places, even in a chance meeting that began with a CEO walking into the wrong restroom. Because sometimes, as Jade and Nathan discovered, the most meaningful journeys start with the biggest mistakes. Thanks for being part of our storytelling community. If you enjoyed watching our hardworking heroine and the once untouchable CEO find love in the most unlikely of circumstances, there's more to come. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you stories that tug at your heartstrings and keep you rooting for characters who refuse to give up on hope. Whether it's a lavish boardroom showdown or a chance encounter that sparks romance, our mission is to share uplifting and dramatic plots that linger with you long after the final scene. We encourage everyone to leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Did the final twist catch you by surprise? Do you have any personal stories or perspectives to share? Most importantly, don't forget to subscribe and invite your friends to join us as well. Your support helps us continue creating more unique, enthralling stories, and we can't wait to have you along for the ride. Enjoy and stay tuned.